Hello again, drummers. Welcome back. This is now lesson 3 in my series on how to read and write drum notation. My name is Damien. Hopefully you've had a chance to look over the 2 previous lessons in this series, which covered the most basic stuff, and you will need an understanding of those 2 lessons and the material covered within if you're going to stand a chance at learning today's stuff, because it is quite hectic. We're going to take a bit of a jump. And as just mentioned, it's going to use all the techniques and theory that we learnt in the last 2 lessons. So today we're going to be looking at eighth notes, and to start with, I just want to have a little bit of a recap on the whole parking garage and the whole vehicle thing, because I've used that example because not only does everybody sort of understand what the concept is there, but it actually fits quite well with the way notes works without being too too mathematical at this point, or too difficult a concept to understand. I'm going to also try and keep things as visual as possible, as I have done in the past 2 exercises as well. So if you remember from our last 2 lessons, we've looked at this concept of a parking garage, and the parking garage has 4 bays inside it, and in those bays we can either put witches' hats. In other words, we're going to reserve the bay and nothing's going to go in it, or we're going to put some trucks in there. So we had an image that looked a little bit like this. Okay, so we've had here's our truck, and witches' hats, and basically what happened is we went through and we decided and discussed that this is going to be representative of quarter notes and quarter note rests and bar lines, measures. And so here you see we've converted what was trucks and empty bays to quarter notes, quarter note rests sitting within measures. We've talked about bar lines and all that good stuff. And if you got to the end of the second exercise that I put up, you will have been able to note a few things in music that now start to look a little bit familiar to you. Okay, now today I'm going to take that concept a little bit further. So it says here, a new idea. I've just discovered that if I let smaller vehicles park in my garage, I'll be able to fit more of them in the same amount of space. Okay, so now I'm going to start talking about cars. And the cars that are going to go in my parking garage, the same parking garage from the last 2 exercises, they're going to be exactly half the length of trucks. Okay, so we know a few things even before we go anything further. Well, if they're going to be half the length of trucks, it means that we're going to be able to fit 2 cars in the same space that we could previously only fit 1 truck. Okay, so here we go. Here's an example. So we've got our parking bay, we've got the truck there, and as you can see, the car is quite a bit smaller. In fact, twice as small or half as long as the truck. This is important because this is a very strong mathematical relationship that's going to tie very much into what we're going to learn with eighth notes. Okay, so hopefully all you need to remember there is that the truck is twice as large as a car, or 2 cars fit in the same space that 1 truck will. All right, so as we had before, here's our 4 bays inside the parking garage. You can see that we've got our bay number 1, bay number 2, bay number 3, bay number 4. There's a truck in bay 1, nothing in bay 2, nothing in bay 3, a truck in bay 4, and then I've got my my roller door shutting because the parking garage, of course, is fully accounted for and full and closed. All right, so two cars can fit in each bay, and here's what it will look like. Okay, so now we have a truck in the first bay, we have nothing in the second bay, we have 2 cars in the third bay, and we have a truck in the fourth bay. Now, if you're really clever, you can probably see where this is headed, but if we filled all 4 bays with just cars, it would make sense that we can have 8 cars in this garage, 2 in the first bay, 2 in the second, 2 in the third, and 2 in the fourth bay. And then, as was the case with trucks, we need to then close the garage because it's full and start a new one. And as we saw in the last couple of lessons, this can continue indefinitely. We can fill our garage with cars or blank bays, but once they're all accounted for, we close it off, we start a new bay, fill that one up, close it off, start another bay, etc., etc. Okay, so as it says there, just like trucks, we can choose to either have cars in bays or have them left empty, but once they're full, we close them, we move on. All right, so cars are going to be our eighth notes. Moving on. This is what an eighth note looks like. Now, there's going to be something a little bit new here. So if we look at the eighth note, we're going to be looking on the left-hand side at the note itself. As it was with the quarter notes, we have a note head and a stem. But one thing that makes the eighth notes look very different to quarter notes is this concept of a flag. Okay, so the flag is the curly piece that's coming off the top of that stem. And you'll note there in the bracketed information, flags will always be written to the right of the note when you're writing them with the curl like you see there. As we saw with quarter notes, they can go right way up, they can go upside down. This is also the case with eighth notes, but even if the eighth note is upside down, what you will find is, like quarter notes, the stem will move down and attach itself to the left-hand side of the note head, but the flag will curl up, still facing to the right-hand side of that stem. Okay, so the bottom line there is whether the stem faces up or whether the stem is over the other side of the note head and facing down, the flag will always curl up to the right-hand side of the stem, okay, or of the note as I'm saying there. The eighth note rest looks very different to a quarter note rest, okay? So with a quarter note rest, we saw that it was kind of like, I think I gave the example of a seagull with a busted wing flying sideways. So the eighth note rest looks very much like a seven. Okay, so there should be no confusion when you see a quarter note rest as opposed to an eighth note rest. They're very, very different. Formally, eighth notes are known as quavers. Okay, it is the formal term and you still hear it mentioned, but eighth note, for the same reason as I mentioned with quarter notes, having a note value attributed to the name, calling them eighth note. The eight means something, it has a value. So it's easier to remember what the kind of note is and what kind of room it will take up in our garage, etc., etc. All right, so we're going to refer to them as eighth note, but just be aware they are formally known as quavers. Okay, so eighth note and eighth note rests are counted the same way. You remember with quarter notes, we counted them 1, 2, 3, 4. And even if we were looking at a full measure of quarter note rests, they were still counted 1, 2, 3, 4. It's just that where the rests would be counted but not played. Okay, now we know that two eighth notes fit in the same space as one quarter note, or fit in one of our bays. Okay, so that's essentially saying, if we think of our garage example, that two cars will fit in the same space as one truck. Okay, and that space we're referring to, of course, is called a beat or a count, or in the garage example, that'll be one of our bays. Okay, remember we have 4 bays in the garage. We count eighth notes as 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So there's 8 counts of eighth notes that we can have in the measure, okay, or 8 cars that we can fit in our garage, and each of those cars would be labeled 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay, so that's how we count the 8 cars. Now you may be asking, well, why don't we just count them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8? Why are we putting these and words on cars? Can't we just use numbers? The answer is no, we can't, and there will be a reason for that, and we'll explain that shortly. Okay, so as is the case with quarter notes, eighth note stems can face upwards or down, but pay attention to how the stems and flags have to be positioned in each case. So when you look at these two here, okay, so this is what I was explaining earlier. So the stems are clearly pointing down for those eighth notes, but the flags still point upwards, and they still point in a right hand direction. Okay, the same as the flags do in these notes here where the stems are up. All right, so when we're talking about stems, if stems are up, they attach to the right hand side of the note. If the stems are facing down, they attach to the left side of the note. But flags will always be facing to the right hand side of the note. So we can see the count above each one, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. All right, so this is really our eight cars in the garage here, but just written now in a musical sense. And of course, I'm moving a little bit quicker than I did in the quarter notes because the concepts here are the same. All right, so if you're losing what's going on here, please go back to lesson 1 and 2 and just have a quick recap at how I'm relating the garage scenario with the written notation. Okay, so with rests added, you can see it there. I've put those little 7s in on the count of 2, and on the count of 3 and on the count of 4 and. All right, so 3 rests in there. Again, rests don't tip upside down if you're pushing the stems down. Okay, so this was actually the same with quarter notes. Whether the stems for quarter notes were faced up or down, if you chose to have a quarter note rest, those would not flip upside down like the notes would. They would always stay the right way up. And what I've done there, just for convenience, is I've actually shown you how that measure of music that we're looking at here how it would have been represented if we were looking at it as our garage example. So we have a car on one, we have a car in one end. Right, now we look into bay 2. We've got nothing on the count of 2, but we've got a car on 2 end. We then have we have a car in the third bay on the count of 3. We have no car in the 3 end position. We then move to the fourth bar. We have a car in the fourth bay, but nothing in the 4 and bay. All right, so this again, it holds quite closely with the garage example, and it is quite a good visual way of looking at it. All right, so just to recap, you're looking in the second little instance here. The notes can go up or down, and rest notes can be placed until the measure is full, or you can use notes. But once that measure is full, the same as with quarter notes, if you use rests or notes, it doesn't matter. But once you've accounted for 4 counts and the bar is full, you can't fit anything else, you close that bar and you start a new one. Okay, moving down. Now this is actually a properly written bar of, or measure, or a few measures really, of drum notation. So we can remember a few things from our first lesson. So we're dealing with neutral clef, and that's a good thing because that means it's probably going to be for percussion or some instrument which doesn't use pitch at all. So we also know that we're in 4/4. We haven't dived headfirst into time signatures yet, but that's coming. So now we have a whole bunch of eighth notes and eighth notes rests. As you can see, some of the eighth notes have stems which point up. They're attached to the right-hand side of the note head, like these here, like this one here. And the stem and the flags curl down and face to the right of the notes. Similarly, we have eighth notes where we're choosing to have the stems facing downwards. Where that happens, the stems attach to the left-hand side of the note head, and bear in mind that this is a cross because it's denoting a symbol, as we learned earlier, but it's still a note head. It's a type of note head. So the stems will be down, and again, we've got the flags flipping off there to the right-hand side of the note. We have some measure breaks, okay, bar lines as we know them more commonly. And why is that bar line there? Well, because the way we count eighth notes is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and that's the last count we can have in that measure, or it's the last car we can have in that garage. So what happens? The door closes or the measure finishes, we have a bar line and we start a new measure. And this continues on. Okay, as we move further along, we see we've got some rest there. It's a very generic looking piece of music. It's actually quite ugly at the moment. We're going to learn how to clean that up shortly. But everything you see there is correct. There are positions for all of this stuff. Okay, so we've got bass drum there, we've got a hi-hat there, a snare drum. Looking further down, we've got a floor tom here, ride cymbal in here. Okay, and these were all explained. These positions along the staff were all explained in, I believe it was lesson 2. So go back and look at that if you're not familiar. All right, so how would eighth notes look relative to quarter notes? And this is a very, very important point to make now, because everything we learn in terms of time signatures, timing, note values, tempos, it requires an understanding not just of what each note is, but more importantly, how those notes relate to one another. Okay, and I'll give you a clue. It comes back to what we understand about trucks and cars. We know, for example, that a truck is twice as big as a car, or twice as long as a car, and you can fit 2 cars in the same space. It's that whole double and half principle. So get that in your mind because we're going to need it shortly. Another question I would raise: why do we count eighth notes as 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and instead of just numbering them like we do with quarter notes? We looked at that a little bit earlier. I'm going to explain why those ands in between the numbers have to be there. Okay, and thirdly, is there a better way to write eighth notes instead of having to put flags on all of them? Okay, so we saw in this example here, it does look quite messy, probably a little bit difficult to read if we have to play it quite fast. There are ways of cleaning this up, so we're going to look at that now. Here's how eighth notes look placed over quarter notes. All right, this is one of the most important diagrams you're going to need to know. All right, so the first line there, we can see our quarter notes. Right, we remember from previous lessons that they're going to be counted 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we've got these new eighth notes. Okay, now for convenience, I've left them all facing up, and they're going to be counted as we've just learned: 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay, and in a little graphic down the bottom there, I've shown you how that would represent in our garage example. Okay, so we see the 4 trucks, there are 4 quarter notes, and just below that we see the 8 cars, which is the 8 eighth notes that we see pictured there. All right, now have a look at the 2 counts. Right, we can see, let's go down to the bottom graphic at the moment, we can see that 2 cars fit in the same space as 1 truck. We can see by the parking signs, which is where each of the bays are, that we've got 4 bays there. Okay, and if we look up now at the quarter note and eighth note lines, we can see that the counts kind of line up. Where we see the 1, 2, the 3, and the 4 falling in the quarter note count is actually exactly where it falls in the eighth note, but the ands fall in between, right? If you look back down now at the trucks and cars, that kind of makes sense. The front bumper of each truck is going to line up with the front bumper of every second car. All right. What I'm saying here is the reason we have ands is because we want the 1, the 2, the 3, and the 4 to be in the same spot no matter which way we decide to count. Okay, so if I was counting my bays, or if I was counting my quarter notes, I would count them 1, 2, 3, 4. If I count eighth notes as 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, I can still see where the bays begin. I can still see where the quarter notes fall, even though I'm counting a different type of note now. All right, that's vital. So make sure, if you need to go back and listen to what I've just said, please do so. So my point is, whether you decide to count quarter notes or whether you decide to count eighth notes, whether you decide to use quarter note rests or eighth note rests or a combination of both, the 1, the 2, the 3, and the 4 will always fall in the same spot, irrespective of the type of notes that you are playing and counting. All right, moving on. See how the numbers line up on each count. We've just explained that. Okay, if a truck is in bay 1, no cars can fit into it, and bay 2 is the next available spot. This is actually common sense, but it's very, very much overlooked once we drop the whole car truck example and start looking at just pieces of music. So what we're saying here is, when you see a quarter note, and let's say it's on the count of 1, you cannot put any more notes on the count of 1. So not only does the quarter note play on the count of 1, but it also tells you by definition that you cannot have any more notes until at least the count of 2, because a quarter note actually takes up that whole quarter note space. So if you're counting 1, 2, 3, 4 in a bar, and you hit on 1, and that's your quarter note, you cannot play anything more now until 2. Think of the truck taking up that first bay in the garage. It completely takes up that bay. So as you walk past the bay, you don't have any free space that you can see until you get to that second count or that second bay in the garage. Then you can make a choice of either leaving it empty, putting another truck in there, or, as we've now found out, putting 2 cars in that next bay. But regardless or irrespective of what you choose to do in that second bay, the point is you can't have anything else in that first bay if you decide to put a truck in there, because the truck's going to take up that whole bay. Okay, so as it says there in red, if a quarter note is situated on the count of 1, no quarter notes or eighth notes or any kind of notes or rests can be placed within that space between 1 and 2. The next available place you're going to have to place a note is on the count of 2 and further on. Okay. The second point, trucks can't fit halfway in a bay like cars. They'd hang over into the next bay. So think of somebody who's parking over the edge of the bays. We don't allow that. You have to be fully within your bay. How that translates to music is to say, well, eighth notes get this whole and count. You know, we've got 1 and, 2 and, 3 and, 4 and. But because trucks take up the same amount of room as 2 cars, if we were to park a truck on an and place, which is actually halfway through one of the bays, it's going to hang into the second bay. So that's not going to work, because we're going to have a truck sort of double parking. So the trucks or the quarter notes will not make use of these ands. We only talk about ands when we're talking about eighth notes, about the cars. Okay, so trucks can only be placed within the garage as 1, 2, 3, or 4, or to put that in musical terms, quarter notes can only be placed on 1, 2, 3, 4. But cars get the options of being on 1 or on and, or two, two and, three and, four and four and. So we've got 8 places that cars can go and still fit completely within a bay without hanging over. All right. So let's have a look at this in terms of what it tells us around a piece of music. Now I've put in the bays just to give you a bit of a visual description in grey above the staff. But you can see that there's space involved now. Now we do have quarter notes, we do have eighth notes in there, we've got eighth note rest, we've got quarter note rest, so all the things that we've learned. But there are, given the rules that we've just learned, these arrows are going to be picking out different situations that you're going to need to be aware of. Now, you can see by the way that the music is laid out that those quarter notes tend to be more spaced out, implying that there is a bigger gap between them. Okay, it's actually not correct to think of them as gaps. Okay, because if you look at that very first note, for example, on 1, that's not a gap. That's a note being played on 1, which is taking up all of this room until you get to 2. All right, it's not like there's a little note here and then you've got all this space in here to do what you want with. It's full. It's completely full because the quarter note takes up the whole bay. So as you can see by the first arrow, I cannot fit anything else in here. It's actually full. Now, to make matters worse, sometimes when notation is being written, they won't give extra space to indicate to you, hang on, you've got to leave a bit more room here when you're counting this. Sometimes they'll bunch all the notes up. The only way you're going to know how to time this correctly is by knowing how much room that note takes up by looking at the type of note that we're dealing with, in this case a quarter note. Right? So we would know there that if that first note is a quarter note, then this second note cannot be anywhere but 2 or further on, right? Because this first note is taking up all the room. So if this is on 1, this is most likely on 2, this second note. And when we look at 2, we know that it's a quarter note. Now, a quarter note, of course, will take up a full count again. So these next notes have to be starting on 3, no sooner. Okay? Now we see on 3 here that 3 is an eighth note. It's a car, which means if we have a car sitting in bay 3, we do have the option of getting another car in that same bay before we have to reach the 4th bay. And that's exactly what's happened here. So what we see is 1, 2, 3, and, because they're both filled with 2 different notes, 4 is an eighth note again, but of course it's a rest this time. So when we're looking at the 4th bay, we've got a car parked in the second half of that bay, but nothing in the first half. So we can put a car in there if we like. Okay, so as the note says, I can fit 1 car in here. I can't fit a truck in there. Unfortunately, there's a car taking up the second half of that bay, or an eighth note taking up the second half of that count. So if I was to put a truck in there, it would need to take up, as it does on 1 and 2, it would need to take up that full count, which of course is not possible because we have a car sitting here. So hopefully this is starting to make sense. So as we move on, once again, as per the first bar, we can't fit anything in here. No cars, no trucks. That truck has got a big trailer on it, which is going to take up that full bar. So then we move to 2. We've got 2 cars in the bay of 2, so that's now full. We can't put anything in there. Now hang on a second. In the 3rd bay, or in the 3rd count, if we're referring to music, we can fit a full truck, because there's nothing in the whole bay, right? So we can fit a whole truck. We can fit 1 car on the count of 3 and leave a space on 3 and. We can fit a car on 3 and but leave a space on 3. That's what's happening in this previous bar here on the count of 4. Or we can fit 2 cars in here, if we like. 1 on 3 and 1 on 3 and. Okay, and then of course the bay of 4 is completely taken up with 2 cars. Hopefully this is starting to make sense. It's a very important concept, right? Okay, you have to understand that if we're dealing with notes, notes have a certain length attributed to them. They're not just a dot on a piece of paper. They take up a certain amount of room within a measure. They take up a certain amount of time when we're counting them. This is very, very important, and it's why I decided to use the example of trucks and cars. You don't just have the bumpers of each, you have this full vehicle that's taking up a certain amount of room. Okay? Go back over that if you don't understand any of it. It's very, very important that you understand the relationship between obviously between quarter notes and eighth notes, how they fit together, why they're counted the way they are so that we can see where the 1, 2, 3, 4 fall, and then of course what it means in terms of how much space we have to work with notes. We're going to look a lot more at this as we start compiling pieces of music now and not just dealing with individual notes. All right, so the other thing that I pointed out earlier that we didn't get to until now is there a better way to write eighth notes so that it doesn't look so ugly with all these flags lying about? And it turns out that yes, of course there is. And we've got a few options here. So we're going to start looking at this concept of tying the flags together. And I want you to think now back at the cars example, and I'm going to put in a concept here now. If we have cars, we can actually tie them together at the tow ball, all right? This is what our ties are going to be. They're literally going to be pieces of rope tying cars together, all right? There's a couple of conditions. Our flags, or our bits of rope on the car, can never be tied across measures. And so what that means in terms of our garage, we can tie cars together within the garage, but once we've closed that door, in other words, when we've placed a bar line or closed a measure, the ties or the flags, we can't join them across those measures, or we can't join one garage to another. We would normally join 2 or 4 cars together. Okay, now remember we can have 8 of them in a garage, but we generally will tie only 2 or 4 together at one time, provided they don't cross over the measure, as we explained in the first point. And you tie however many looks nice to you on paper. This is going to make a bit more sense in a moment. Okay. As a best practice, when we're talking about music now, just forgetting the car example, when we tie flags, we generally don't join them across the middle of a measure either. Okay, so we absolutely cannot ever tie them across a measure, but for ease of reading, we generally don't tie them across the middle of the bar either. So here's 3 ways that we can join flags. Okay, so the flags aren't flags as much as they are, I guess, lines joining notes now. All right, these are eighth notes. Think about the look of the eighth notes that we know now. We can see there that they've got this little flag. If that flag is a piece of ribbon, let's say, think of what would happen if you tied 2 of those pieces of ribbon together. It almost pulls it tight, and that's the way I tend to explain flags when they're tying to other notes of the same value. Okay, so these across the top here, these are all eighth notes, but because they are all eighth notes, we can join them all together. We can join those flags, or join those pieces of ribbon, or join those ropes in between the cars and pull them tight, and then we see the 8 cars joined together. But as I explained in point 2, we generally don't put that many of them tied together. It's a bit ugly to read, so any of the bottom 2 examples are fine. Okay, so we can have 4 of them joined together, and you can see there that they tend to not join now over the middle of the bar. So we'll join all the eighth notes at 1, 1 and, 2, 2 and, then we would break that flag, and then 3, 3 and 4 and will be joined. These are exactly the same as these. We still play on every count. We still count every note as 1, 1 and, 2, 2 and, 3 and, 4 and. But we've just decided to view them pictorially a little bit different. All right. So one question that people do ask me is, well, you said that flags are always coming off the right side of the note, and that's okay there, but clearly not the case on 2 and. If we look at 2 and, you can see that the flag comes off the stem in a left direction, and to which I would answer and apologize and say, well, yes, well, strictly it's not always coming off to the right. If the eighth notes are sitting there on their own, yes, the flags absolutely will have that little curl look to them, and they will always move to the right of the note. But when it comes to flags, if there are notes around that are the same as eighth notes, in other words, other eighth notes, we join them together the way that you're seeing them here, either as 4s or as 2s. And then the flags will go in whichever direction they need to go to make that look pretty. Right? All of the examples on that page are all eighth notes. Every position of eighth notes, or every bay in the garage, is being filled by a car. We are choosing to join these in like a summary to make them a little bit easier to read than having to look at something that looks like that. All right. So that said, let's have a look at that ugly example that I just brought up. So here it is up top. This was before we had anything tied. Okay, we didn't tie any of the flags together. It was all loose. And now what I've done in the two examples below is I've shown you situations where we have the option to join either in twos. So here you can see I've joined the flags in twos down the bottom here. All right, so that's the bottom line example. Okay, wherever I see two eighth notes together, I can join them, and that's what it will look like. Now you notice here on the count of 3 and, I haven't joined that eighth note to that eighth note. Why? Well, because if you look at the previous example, it's almost like picking out bays here. There's 1 and 1 end, there's 2 and 2 end, there's 3 and 3 end, and 4 and 4 end. So I've basically broken the flags at each quarter note point. In other words, on the count of 1, count of 2, count of 3, and count of 4, I've decided to join new flags together. And I'm not joining notes that are in between those counts. So anything that's joining on and, I'm going to put it back to join on the note that was just before it. But I'm not going to join ands to new bays or new counts. So everything that happens between 1 and 2 can join together. Everything that happens between 2 and 3 can join together. Everything between 3 and 4 can join together. And everything between 4 and the end of the measure can join together. But I'm not going to join across counts. So I'm not going to join some of the stuff from 1 to some of the stuff that's going on in 2. So hopefully that makes sense. Now, when I decide that I want to join by 4s, I'm going to put it this way. Everything that happens between 1 and 2 and 3, I'm going to join. But everything that happens between 3 and 4 and the end of the bar, I'm going to join. So going by our previous example again, so I'm going to have a note here or a point here at 1. Everything between 1 and halfway through the measure, so 1 and 2 and, can all join together. Everything from 3 until the end of the bar can also join together. Again, these are choices that you make depending on what looks easiest to you. So when you look at this example now, on the left-hand side, we've broken it down to show the notes as they would be joined in 2s. And on the other side, we've shown the flags joined in 4s wherever possible. You can see that there's two distinctly different looks. One way will look easier to you than the other, and the good news is they're both acceptable. Okay? Now bear in mind, because these are all eighth notes, I could have, if I had so chosen, I could have joined that hi-hat. I could have joined the flag from that hi-hat to these notes here. Okay? Because they form part of the notes between 3 and the end of the bar. They're all in the second half of the measure, if you like. So what you would have seen there is a rest on 3. Now, of course, rests don't have any flags, so they can never join to anything. They just sit on their own. But 3 and 4 and could all have joined, the same way as we see here on 1 and 2 and 2 and. That was a choice that I made to say, no, I'm going to leave this one on its own because it will kind of let you know that it forms part of what's going on in 3. But then 4 and 4 and I'm going to join together. So technically there, I'm probably looking at these things as pairs rather than as 4s. But I could have chosen to do it either way. I could have joined 3 and 4 and all together. Or I could have, as I've done, just kept them separate and joined them in pairs. Okay? This is a big step. And it does cause some confusion because options are now introduced. There's no black and white, there's no right or wrong. It's really a case of saying, well, I understand these concepts well enough now, which one am I going to use? And as we saw before, notes can face up, they can face down, and depending on how the music is written, you have the choice to put stems up or down in the same way that you have a choice to join, not join, join in 2s or join in 4s, the flags that you have available on these eighth notes. All right. This will admittedly take some time to become routine for you, so give yourself a chance to go through it and test yourself and see how you go. All right, so moving on. In fact, we're not moving on. That's the last slide that I have for you. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to go back to this slide here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the metronome on now, and hopefully you can hear this clicking away. So for those who want to try it themselves, I've got the metronome set at 55 beats a minute, and this is actually quarter notes that I'm clicking away here now. So by definition, I would count these notes 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is very, very important because it means now if I play eighth notes, and I understand from what I've been taught thus far that the 1, the 2, the 3, and the 4 still have to fall in time with those beats, it's going to mean that the ands have to be played or counted exactly halfway between the beats that I'm hearing. So what this will actually mean, in fact, is that when I play the eighth notes, they will have to be counted twice as fast as the beats that I'm hearing on the metronome in order to fit 8 of them in the space that I am only counting 4. All right? Think of our trucks and our cars. If we want to put 8 cars in the 4 bays that we have, they can't be as long in length as trucks. They need to be shorter, a shorter duration as it is. So where we have space for 4 trucks, or in music where we have room for 4 counts, we now have to halve that amount of space or double the amount of counts that we have in order to fit eighth notes in that same space. So here's what's going to happen. I've got my metronome on. I'm going to count quarter notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I'm going to introduce the eighth note count, and you'll hear how the 1, 2, 3, and 4 still line up. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So you can see there that even though I've decided to use quarter notes on the metronome, it doesn't matter. Our count allows us to still say 1, 2, 3, 4 when we're counting eighth notes, but it gives us an indication of where the and are going to be placed relative to the quarter notes. This is a huge concept. It's vitally important that this is understood. If I now change the tempo of my quarter notes, I'm going to put this up to 75. A little bit quicker. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2, 3, 4. So you can see that, again, irrespective of our tempo, that relationship between how we play eighth notes versus quarter notes, how we count eighth notes versus quarter note, is key to understanding how to read timing in music. Okay, so if we look at this example now, I'm going to go back to 50 beats a minute. I'm going to count off a bar of quarter notes, and then I'm going to count where we see quarter notes and where we see eighth notes. And I'll try and follow along. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And 1, 2, and 3, 4, and. Okay, so even though we had rests there, they were still counted so that we know where we are. So if I'm going to tap along to this now, it's going to sound like this. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and. So this piece of music is a mixture of quarter notes, eighth note rests, but I can use quarter notes on the metronome to line up where each of those things, each of those notes are going to land. And of course, if I was playing this as a piece of music, this would all be on the snare drum because of the position that you're seeing those notes. All right. So the concept is both very simple, and it's actually quite awkward to get fluent. I mean, if we push this up to say 120, and we go back to our little graphic here. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and now I'm going to tap that out. So you can see that eighth notes are not only faster, but by definition they are exactly twice as fast as quarter notes. Or you can fit twice as many eighth notes in the same space that you would be able to fit 4 quarter notes. 4 quarter notes and eighth notes would both be considered a complete full bar. Okay, in which case you would then close the measure and start a new bar. So what does this mean? Well, it actually means we can count any way we like. I could have the metronome counting quarter notes for me, but I could be counting eighth notes. But when things get very, very fast, so we're going metal here, we're going at 200 beats a minute, it's just not going to be feasible to count every single eighth note. So we need to be able to count perhaps quarter notes, but still know where those eighth notes are going to be, even though we can't count them all. So this is at quarter notes at 200 beats a minute. So I'm going to play quarter notes now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's the top line. Now I'm going to play the bottom line, the eighth notes, but I'm only going to count the quarter notes. And you'll hear the relationship. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. And in fact, that's incorrect. So let me try that again. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so playing eighth notes but counting quarter notes. You can imagine if you were trying to keep time at 200 beats a minute counting every eighth note, it's going to become a mess. All right, so hopefully you can now get your own metronome out, set yourself a nice speed, and just exchange between playing quarter notes to playing eighth notes, counting quarter notes to counting eighth notes. But keep that quarter note going on the metronome because you really do need to hear the way quarter notes and eighth notes relate to one another, both in the way that they're counted and in the way that they're played. That doubling and that halving of speed. All right. As before, if you do have any questions, please feel free to email. You can email at perthdrummers@gmail.com or come onto the Perth Drummers forum and our Facebook page and ask some questions, and I'll be more than happy to answer them for you. Thanks again and enjoy.